Good evening, guys. My name is Darshan, and today I'm going to talk about the missing piece of React ecosystem that I think, and which is a React query. So before we get started, again, let's start with my introduction. Hi, I am Darshan. I am an SD Internet Geeky Ants, and I generally work with React and React Native, JavaScript, and my favorite language is TypeScript, like one of the favorite language. Apart from the tech, I really love to watch sitcoms as well. Like I watch so many sitcoms and would love to talk about them. I am interested in public speaking as well. So like this is like the hobby. Like I never am a professional, but yeah, I do. And the blogging, like this is something like I started last year because I am learning something and I would love to share with the people who are there learning. So yeah, I write about technical, like there is a series called a crash blog of TypeScript. So in it I write about TypeScript, so you can get started with. Okay, so uh sorry guys. Okay. Okay, so the objectives, this is really like formal thing to do whenever we do a PPT presentation. So today I really want to talk about React query. Like you will probably thinking like why another library? Why we need to think about another library? Why we need to install this library at the first place and increasing the bundle size? So again, this is something that we needed for a longer time. And again, we're going to talk about React ecosystem, the challenges we need to deal with whenever we do the API request. So this library is something that related to our API request and more specifically a REST APIs. So again, this is our sections or topics that we are gonna cover. Okay, the first section is the React ecosystem. Now, to be honest, why I love React and why everyone love React, because that it has a very wide or broad range of the libraries in this ecosystem. Like to managing a state, we have Redux. To handle the UI, to build a different or amazing or beautiful UI, we have something like Material UI. We have Tailwind. We have Theme UI. We also have native base. And to handle the navigation, we have React Router. To take care of the developer experience, we have ESLint, or we have a meta framework like Next.js, Gatsby, or something like Remix just came up last year as an open source. But we are forgetting something. Or before I can move forward, React ecosystem is like six infinity stones. So if you're a fan of Marvel, you will understand this. For the guys who don't know what is a Marvel, Marvel is a, I guess you know, right? It's MCU, and there is the story of the six Infinity Stone. Each stone has their own power that you can use it. It's something like I can relate to the React ecosystem. Okay, I don't want to bore you guys, so I added some memes that we have everything. Like as a React developer, we think we have everything, but we really forget something. And you will like, if you forget something, then it wasn't important, just let it be. And yeah, you're right, just let it be. But we forget about the REST API, and this is really important because when the GraphQL came, GraphQL has this really amazing thing called Apollo client, which basically handles everything, and we don't have to write any extra logic to handle a GraphQL query. But what about REST APIs? REST API is really important part because no matter what you do, no matter even you are making to-do application, even if you are making a blog application or something like a SaaS application, REST API perform a really important part, and which is why I really want to talk about API request is mostly a REST APIs. So when we are talking about REST API, you will see that okay, we don't have to do anything. We will install something like XCS. We will use fetch, and we will pass some authorization headers, and we will set the post and get, and that's we are done, right? Our data will be load, and we will list out all the data, and if something is going to wrong, we will do it. But if you are really if we are really concerned about user experience as an API request perspective, there are some challenges that we need to deal with. And this is something like caching, managing state, error handling, reducing the requesting, state synchronization, and a lot of things. I just mentioned some of them because this is really important. I think. So the caching is something like something that is hardest thing to do in a computer science, because when we are implementing a caching, and as a front end developer, caching is not caching is something that we don't interact with often. We just use a global state management library that handles these states. But okay, by the way, Tanner Linsley was the author of the React query, and this is the podcast of the Tanner Linsley that I have listened. I have listened yesterday, so I just wanted to mention about this podcast, that how he is talking about UI state and server state. So this is a podcast with the Cancy dots. He's talking about why front end developer, as a front end engineer, we need to take care of the UI state and server state separately. Now you will talk like, hey, there is a different type of the states in a React application. Yes, there is a different type of states in a React application, like a UI state and a server state. So whenever we fetch a request, we basically treat that data as a UI state. Like we combine those data with the use state or use reducer. But they both need to treat it separately. The first thing, as you can see in the UI state, we basically build this state with help of the hooks, like use states and use reducer, or even we use something like redux to handle a state as a globally. And on the other hand, we have server state, in which we basically use this state, access this state with help of the REST API or GraphQL. But what we will do is that we will basically take this data and we will combine that server state with the use state, and then we will show that data in a traditional React application, like I was doing till now. Like when I was fetching something, like when I'm building a front end application and I don't care about the backend, and I will use some REST API which is publicly available. I will basically fetch this data with help of the fetch API or XCS library, and I will just use the use state library, and I will combine those data, and I will just list all the data. But you know what? This is really common thing, and we are just doing and we are repeating the code again and again all over the place. And that's what React query is solving. So again, there are two types of state. The first one is a UI state and the server state. Now UI state is something like we build to control the UI, something like just close the pop-up, or just show the pop-ups, or basically show the toast this, and something like this is related to the UI. On a server state, this is really different from the UI state, because it has a different data structure. This is something as like maybe they have a different life cycles and all this thing that don't relate it to any UI blocks or any UI state. But we don't care about it. We just put this data to the states as a local state, and we just store them. So the challenges that React query is solving is that one of the I love it, and which is handling the API request, caching, state synchronization, clean code, and performance. I will going to talk about this one by one. So the first thing is user experience. Obviously, user experience is one of the important concern that we need to take care of it, because why user is using our application, because we are providing them a great user experience. And whenever we fetch the API request, user experience is one of the important thing that we need to take care of it. Why? So let's understand this with the diagrams. So again, the very traditional client and server architecture, but I have just changed, slightly modified this library to understand as a front end developer. So whenever we first fetch the API request, whenever we start fetching some API request, something like to dos or something like movies or anything, so as you can see in the phase one, we will basically call that API with using fetch function or XCS function, which are available. And in the second phase, you will see that so in the second phase we will basically get that response from the server, and the third phase is basically in the error phase, which we don't like it, because it is something like something has wrong, something has really get wrong. Even either your client is offline, or maybe your server is crash or something, anything can be happen. So as you can see, the loading state and this three phase needs to be an acknowledgement to the user, like what is happening in our application. If you are fetching something, show the loading indicator. If you have fetched data successfully, show the list of the data. If something went wrong, show something like alert, like hey, something went wrong, please try again, and all this thing. And we basically handle this thing by writing our own logic. If I zoom in this diagram, you will see that this is something that we need to deal with. As a phase one, so some loaders, it can be anything, it depends on your UI designer. In the phase two, we are just fetching some to-do list. And in the phase three, okay, if somehow something went wrong, just show the message, just show the error message. So this is something that we need to deal with, and this is a very obvious thing. No matter what you are building, network request is something is that uh, you have to make it in your React application. Now again, so like I talked about in the last slide, this is something that we need to handle it one by ourselves. We need to write some logic by ourselves. As you can see that this is something is loading, set is loading, error, set, error. This is a very common thing that we need to write. This is very common logic that we need to write in our application, in our component. So whenever we are communicating with our server. So I was a bit of I was a bit of confused, like why, like is there any good way to handle the API request? Or let's say, okay, that's fine, we don't like write like we don't write code like you, we just use something like Redux or any Mobugs, and then we use a Redux Thunk, or maybe we use a Redux Saga to to handle this API request. Well, let me tell you the one thing, and that is that when Redux was built, it was never built to handle the server state. It was never built to handle the server API calls. Because why? That's why we need to. That's why we need to add the middleware called the Redux Thunk and Redux Saga, because Redux does not provide a support for the API request out of the box. We need to add this library called Redux Thunk or Redux Saga as a middleware. So that's really true, and this really like a daunting part that we need to take care of it. Again, let's suppose if you are handling the API request with the Redux, as you can see, we have some asynchronous middleware, let's say Redux Thunk. So what the async middleware do is that, let's suppose you are sending some message to this server. Let's suppose you are writing, you have an email server and you are writing an email. So as you can see, as long as you click on the button, as long as your user click on the button, you are dispatching some sort of the events. Let's suppose is loading, and also you are fetching the API in the background, and also your dispatcher is waiting for that promise to be resolved. You have let's suppose you are waiting for the promise, and then you have dispatches this loading thing as well. Okay, now as you can see, there can be a two different possibility, the result and the error. And the result can be, let's suppose, okay, your email has been sent successfully, error, let's suppose something went wrong. So again, we need to disturb the entire global state to handle this, to handle our user experience. As you can see, this can be a little bit, I think this can be a little bit performance I guess, because as you can see that we are doing a very tiny, we are dispatching a very tiny events, but it can have a really great impact. So that's why most of the people don't prefer Redux, or they use something like context API to handle this kind of the to handle this kind of the state in a component tree. But still, still you use context is not for use context for not for build to handle those kind of the states. Again, the server state context API is something that again you need that lets you to handle the component tree, that lets you to handle the UI. Again, I told you earlier, like toggling something or showing some pop-up, but it was never meant to build. It was never meant to handle the API requests. So that's why React Query is here. React Query basically provide you caching, retry, refetch, and all the functionality that we ever needed to handle the API requests. So let's talk about caching. So the caching is something, if you don't have any idea about caching is something, it's a memory that relies on your device. So whenever we do API request, what React Query does is that React Query store that response to that cache. So again, any other time, if your client is asking for the same request, let's suppose you are fetching some to-dos. So what React Query does that React Query store that to-dos in that cache. So what happens that whenever your user is asking for the to do again, let's say second time, so instead of making a request to the server, it will check that if its to do is available or the caches or not. If it is available, it will basically return that to do. So let's understand this diagram. As you can see, a React app is asking for a data. Hey, I need a data, and React caches like, let me check, like I have caches the data, or do I need to fetch this fetch the API call. So as you can see that since this was the first time, React cache is requesting for the server, like seems like I have to call to a server. As you can see, it's calling a server, and the fourth time when the server is returning the data, React query just catch this data, and also React query just return this data to the React app. So this will prevent to happen a multiple request at the same time. Let's suppose at the same time another component is asking for the same data. What React query will does that instead of making the another request, it will basically give that stale data. We also call this stale data. There is another library called use SWR by Versal, which basically which basically has the same concept like stale by revalidated data. And this is really important. Let's suppose this is really important because you are avoiding a multiple request, and also catching is catching is something. This is one of the hard concept that we need in a computer science, that it's a kind of the complicated to handle it by oneself. So that's why React query provided out of the box. Another automatic retry is something that we have seen in a modern application. Something like let's suppose if you are fetching some data to the client, and somehow it went wrong. So what will be sorry. So you will press a try again button. So what happens that this data will be retry to fetch it, but instead React query provide you a property called retry. This will basically refetch your data in a given number of times. Let's suppose if you are retrying for 3 times, React query will try to fetch this data 3 times, and then it will show the final message that okay, we are failed to retry your data. Refetching is the concept in which let's suppose if your user is having a multiple tabs, like here 1 2 3 4 and 5. So what happens that, let's suppose there is a tab, it's been opening for a while. Let's suppose a YouTube, your user is watching something or streaming something on a YouTube, and your website tabs is disabled for a long time, let's suppose 5 or 10 minutes. So what will happen is that, so whenever your user will go to that tab, it will refresh the data whenever we get a focus. Okay, mutation. So this is all about like get, fetching a query, but we never talk about post and put. So this is something like, this is a really important thing. Like, okay, Darshan, we have seen like how to fetch data. You have just told me that this was really like high overview of a React query. But let's talk about mutation, like how to mutate a data. So for this one, we React query provide mutation. In the mutation, React query has some callback listener. So the first thing is that on mutate, on success, and on error. So as you can see that if you are working with something like chat application in WhatsApp, you will see that when you send the message, there is a loader, or there is something like a timer icon which show that your message is being sent. Okay, and the moment your message reach to the server, you will see the double tick or single tick. And then if something went wrong, let's suppose your client is offline, or the network bandwidth what wasn't sufficient, so we will see the error message. So what is happening is here that we have to handle 3 different cases. The first one is that success cases. Second one is that the temporary message that temporary message that we need to show that hold on, your data is being sent, and the on error if something went wrong. So if you are building this application with that, this need to do a lot of work. This need to write a lot of logic by oneself. This can be a little bit overwhelming. and this is really like a very basic example. There are lots of example which has a really complicated things that we need to do. Like whenever we do a API request, we need to handle lots of things. So this can be a little bit overwhelming. So what React query does, that it provides you a mutation which has a listener something like on mutate, on success, and on error. So this callback will be called in a particular event. Let's suppose you just invoke a mutate thing. So this callback will be invoke on mutate, so you can like show some message or like temporary message, something like, hey, hold on, we are just fetching your data, or hold on, we are just sending your request to the client. In on success, this will tell you that okay, we have successfully made a API request, or any green toast. On error, we will basically tell the client that okay, something went wrong. So this is a very simple and very common example that we need to handle in a day-to-day in our React application. Okay, so it was all about how we can do API request, how we can mutate our data to a server. But now let's talk about the live example, because this was all about philosophy of the React query. Now let's see if it is really possible, or it is really like easy. So here I have example in a code sandbox. Let me go through the example first. So here I am using the Disney API, which is available in the free. I am fetching a different API here. As you can see, I am fetching a different images here. These are the Disney characters. I am fetching. So what is happening is that my application is fetching these characters using the React query. So as you can see, this is a use query, and so whenever you use React query, you need this is a use query which used to fetch the APIs. The first one is the key. The key is really important, because whenever you do an API request, the React query will use this key to cache those data. And this is a callback. This is a very like common callback whenever we do the API request. As you can see, we are fetching the API, we are taking the data, and we are returning this data. So this callback can be anything, something like a fetch call, which needs to be a asynchronized callback, which can be a fetch, which can be a XCS or anything. So we we are fetching a data, as you can see here. And the cool thing about it is that we didn't have to write any extra logic to handle the loading loading thing, or error thing, or is error, because it provides the everything out of the box, and we don't have to write the we generally write this entire block with a try and catch block. Try and catch block is something that handle the error part. So as you can see, if something went wrong, we basically show the message something like, hey user, I think something went wrong at our server side, please hold on. But we didn't need to write that thing here as well. So as you can see, it's very simple and declarative approach to write or to make an API request. So here I am fetching the API, or whenever I click on any character, let's suppose I am clicking on this Olu mail. So what is happening is that, as you can see, is loading is happening, and so that means that our client, our browser is basically making API request, and then we are showing the characters, all this thing. This is all about like, is this character is appear in more than 2 movies or in 2 TV shows and video games and all. But the cool thing about this React query is that if I reload this page, as you can see that the loading time was very minimal from the previous one. And if I go back, as you can see, let's go to your home page again, and if I click on this one, and if I go back, and if I again click on this one, as you can see that it was very fast. It was like your data was being stored in a client side. So as you can see, we don't need to wait for to load to make the API request, because React query basically cache that data in a cache, and we don't need to cache the data again. So again, if I do this, as you can see, the data is being stored in a cache memory, so it does not do another API request. And this is a character, as you can see, the character component, which is just representing, displaying the images and the title. And if I click on this one, as you can see, this is the body of the component in which I am using a React Router DOM to navigate between the pages. And let's see the another file, which is a character info. So here, as you can see, I am using a use query hook to make an API call. And as you can see here, I have used the array. The array, this can be anything. You can also use something like an object. If you are working with any search history, what you will do, let's suppose you will add some filters, let's say completed or anything. So the key can be anything, but which needs to be a serialized. So keep in mind this: whatever you are passing in the array, it need to be serialized. Again, I am providing a callback option, which is a async. That means this need to be resolved first. Again, I am returning the data here. And the same thing, like, it is really easy, the way to write a clean code. As you can see, we don't need to write any extra logic again to handle the is loading and is error again. And this is the is tail. This is a common property that that React query provide to give you the like a simple message that if it is a stale data, that means the data is loading from a caches or not. So this is like React query is cool, and I really like it because now I can focus more on building a UI thing, because now everything is taken care of by React query. So this was all about React query, and I hope you will use this library React query in your next or existing project, and you will handle your REST API more efficiently.